Anu Põder was born on 17 November 1947 in Kanepi, southern Estonia, as the first child in the family. Forced by circumstances, her father Hendrik worked as a truck driver, having abandoned prospects of further education because of the Soviet occupation. Mother Linda was a homemaker. Up until entering secondary school, Anu lived at the home in the village of Joksi, which remained an important place for her throughout her life. She has described it as follows. For the spiritual balance of my existence, I need to have one foot in the forests around Kanepi and the other in the tumult of a big city. In this image, we see family home of the artist. Anu Põder began her art studies at the Tartu Art School, when she studied artistic design from 1967 to 1970. This applied arts institution was established in Tartu after the first Estonian higher art school, Palas, had been closed down in the mid-1940s. The school served as a stepping stone for many South Estonian artists. In 1970, Anu Põder continued her studies at the Estonian State Art Institute, specializing in sculpture. She graduated in 1976 with a diploma as sculpture educator. The education received at the Estonian State Art Institute was essentially conservative. The majority of tutors consider sculpture to be object modeled in clay and cast in metal, yet this approach provided the graduates with an excellent skills in modeling and a good command of material. The focus of avant-garde art in Estonia in the second half of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s was primarily on pop art, and that was the dominant mind frame when Põder began her sculpture studies. Having experimented in the 1970s, among other things, with bright colors and images of the contemporary human being, the most important lesson Põder learned from the pop was an interest in the everyday life and materials. Anu Põder with her three daughters, Saskia, Alice, and Maria. Photo was published in a woman's magazine. In 1973, during her studies at Estonian State Art Institute, Põder married the painter Yuri Kask, and they had three daughters. At the same time, she participated in exhibitions and received the annual Young Artist Award of the Estonian Artists Association in 1979. The latter was regarded as an important reward at the time and was only granted to the most talented young artists. Põder and Kask separated in 1983. After their separation, she raised their daughters as a single mother. The marriage was officially dissolved in 1995. Anu Põder preferred not to disclose the intention behind her works. In the few rare interviews that she gave, the conversation remained strictly focused on form and techniques. Her first two-person exhibition, alongside textile artist Ivica Karmik, which was held at Tallinn City Museum in 1985 and was titled Form and Color in Textile, was characteristic of the way she used to highlight the formal elements of art. The point of departure of Anu Põder's art throughout the decades was her relationship with material. In the early 1980s, when the majority of Estonian sculptures were using durable materials, such as bronze, which was easy to obtain in the Soviet Union, Anu Põder began to experiment without any concrete role models with textile, epoxy glue, and plastic. Reassessing sculpture as something soft and primary material-based was an essentially revolutionary idea in Estonian art at the time. It linked Põder's art more closely to the tradition of applied art than to the prevailing sculpture discourse. She also had to be innovative in acquiring these atypical materials for creating art. For example, plastic reached Anu Põder through her brother, who worked as a doctor in a hospital and supplied her with plastic boards. Thanks to her classical training in sculpture, Anu Põder was a skillful modeler. Most of her skin-like plastic works were created with the help of a pre-model form, which the artist heated in a tap of water to render it malleable, while artists working in durable materials could, if needed, use the help of the masters at the sculpture workshop. Põder was instead assisted by her daughters in preparing the plastic. In addition to her home studio, Anu Põder worked also in the shared sculpture studio in the Artists Association building in Freedom Square, sharing the working space with the renowned Estonian sculptors. There is no art on commission, not even portraits, in Põder's artistic legacy from Soviet times, which would have guaranteed a secure and stable income for a single mother of three. Instead, her art from the 1980s dealt primarily with the female body experience and psychological analysis, often addressing truly personal experiences and memories through the universal image of a doll. Here we can see artist's home studio. In the Soviet Union, it was customary to build studio apartments for artists on the top floors of a newly built apartment blocks, combining living quarters with working premises. In Tallinn, the best known among such buildings were the high-rises built in the residential district of Lasnamäe in the 1980s. The studio apartments were provided first and foremost to married couples with children, with the premise that one of the partners was a well-known artist. Anu Põder lived in such an apartment, which enabled her to combine home and work more effectively. Initially, the studio had been allocated to Yuri Kask, who had vacated it in the 1990s. Once Põder gained rights to use the Lasnamäe studio apartment as her personal studio, she had to leave the shared sculpture studio of the Artists Association. On the one hand, Lasnamäe offered more convenient living conditions. On the other hand, it was not a district preferred or appreciated by the Estonian-speaking population because it had been devised by the authorities to resolve the housing issues of the non-Estonian-speaking workforce. And its size and proportions seemed alienating compared to the local building traditions. The overcrowded buses taking people to the district inspired Põder to create the works on one foot from Lasnamäe and with a trumpet from Lasnamäe. According to Anu Põder, a large proportion of her works from the 1980s were experiments and served as basis for the works she created in 1990s. A considerable number of Põder's early works have either lost, gone missing, or have been reutilized by the artist herself. An example of the latter is one of her earliest soft sculptures, doll, which was made to stand, whose silhouette can clearly be seen in the 1994 sculpture Long Back. It is symbolic of the way the artist revisited her early works over the years and reused them in new contexts. In addition to art, a significant part of Anu Põder's life was devoted to teaching. This was a practical necessity to secure a stable income, but teaching suited Põder well, and she was highly appreciated as an art teacher. She had previously minored in pedagogy at Estonian State Art Institute, but she took on a full-time job as an art teacher only in 1989. At first at the Tallinn Art School, and from the 1993 onward at the then Tallinn Art University, which from 1995 is called the Estonian Academy of Arts. As a person, Anu Põder was modest and sincere, but also very determined and even headstrong. Her decision to discard stonework and bronze casting reflects her ambition to be artistically as independent in every aspect of her creative process as possible. Anu Põder was unable to realize her childhood dream of becoming a ballerina because of her small stature. Dancing was nevertheless a theme close to her heart, and to which she returned in her work before the performance. Amply captures the dancer's tension before going on stage. And in the rare comments on her art, in which she compared sculpture as an art form primarily to dance. In the 1990s, Põder focused increasingly on installations which differentiated her from the majority of her peers. She was one of the few artists who, having received an education in the Soviet period, experienced no interruption in the reception or presence of her works in the art scene, unlike several of her peers whose artistic style and themes choices fell short of expectations to the art in the 1990s. In 1996, Põder participated in the fourth annual exhibition of the Soros Center for Contemporary Art, Estonia as a Sign. The shift from doll to dealing with the trace and space of the human body had taken place a year before, manifested in her work Space for My Body. The works displayed at the exhibition, Cut as a Sign, Fur Coats, and Cut as a Sign, Coats, elaborated on the theme in dialogue with the national history and the artist's childhood memories. The series was set up by cutting up all discarded coats in the artist's country home in Juoksi. Though initially Anu Põder was fascinated by the graphic patterns that had emerged on the textile due to wear and tear, and the fading of colors subsequently in the actual works, the cut-up fur coats became metaphors that unraveled the psychological and emotional panorama of the former wearers. Although Anu Põder never defined herself as being part of the feminist discourse, her 1994 solo exhibition, Softly in Light, was part of the Swedish-Estonian feminist art project Codex. The 217th solo exhibition at the Kumu Art Museum clearly established her as being part of the feminist discourse, juxtaposing her works with those by Alina Szapocznikow and Anna Mendieta, among others. Towards the end of the 1990s, Põder experimented with various new natural materials, mainly with soap. The installation Kirtsabut, the food space of the 20th century man, is a good example of how her interest in material was closely intertwined with her personal memories, experiences, and surroundings, particularly her childhood homestead in Yoksi. The soap used in the installation came from the country home. It had been made by her grandmother, possibly from tallow left over after the slaughtering of a pig. In the case of the furs and coats, this work is also about revealing a secret and usually hidden space, but this time, exceptionally, through the male bodily experience. The work implies a level of meaning related to the countryman, a dialogue between sweat and soap, as well as soap boiling as a creative work of the country woman, similar to that of a sculpture. Anu Põder passed away in 2013 at the age of 65 due to the severe illness. Over the year, she created approximately 60 pieces of art, 44 of which have survived to this day. Her works belong to the collections of Tate Modern, the Art Museum of Estonia, the Tartu Art Museum, and to the collections of Anu Põder's heirs.